And of course, who did we end up playing in the final except Wicklow? I mean,
no,
it couldn't have been more awkward. It just couldn't have been more awkward.
We are rolling. Kevin Lewis, welcome to Throwing Stones. How are you?
How are you, Jeremy? How are things? I don't know what you've lined up for me here, but anyway, I'm here.
No, absolutely delighted to have you on. Head coach of Greystones Rugby Club for the past 7 seasons. So for me, this feels a little bit like I'm in the principal's office, talking to the headmaster, or at least in class with the mad scientist. You've always kind of reminded me a bit, Kev, of Walter White's character in Breaking Bad, such as your meticulous approach to rugby. As I said, you've been head coach for 7 seasons in Greystones. Most people identify you as a coach, but you actually started off as a player, and you're coming from Tullamore. You moved up this direction and you joined Greystones Rugby Club. What was the story there? What brought you up here, and what brought you down to Greystones?
Just trying to think of other analogies other than the one you're after giving me earlier on there. But the whole obviously I came up for work, Jeremy, and that's how it started. I was working in Bray, in the Bray BEC, and in fact, the first year I was working there, I was going up and down to Nina because it was Nina centenary year. We had a lot of very good games. You know, the way at that stage you used to play a lot of games against touring teams, or I remember we had Salem, match against Salem, match against Munster, Invite and things like that. So it was a great year. But anyway, the following year, there was never any doubt in my mind. Greystones was such a name at the time, such a buzz about it. It was so close. I mean, it was an obvious place to go. And so
did you know anybody in the club at the time?
Didn't know a soul.
Really? Yeah.
No.
Well, so I mean, because there was other clubs close enough to Bray, you know, De La Salle or Sea Point, or that direction. So Greystones was a well-known name at the time, and that was what lured you down.
Yeah, it was, and it was, it was a team at the top of a pinnacle of everything at the time. You know, some great players and whatever else. I obviously kind of vaguely knew the likes of Tony Doyle and people like that from the seafront, but the idea was to sort of see how I could get on there and just test myself as much as I could, and it's like any rugby player, they just want to play wherever they can get the most out of themselves, so that was where I started from anyway, and it was an interesting journey for a couple of seasons. And
so you were a hooker, is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I managed to join a club that, if I'd done my homework right, I would have known that Paddy Madigan was a Leinster hooker and Spud Murphy was going to become an Irish hooker. So wasn't the brightest analysis done at that stage, I can tell you. But anyway, it was still very enjoyable, and in fact, the training was great. The whole camaraderie in the club and the players were great. So I really enjoyed it for a couple of years,
Around that time, so we're talking kind of late 80s, early 90s, is that right?
Unfortunately, it's actually mid 80s. I know. Sorry, yeah, I thought the hair might have been a giveaway, but yeah, about 85, I think. Yeah.
Okay, right. So you come down, and as you say, Greystones were a high flying club at the time, and there were some big names, guys that would go on to be internationals, knocking around the club around that time. And you've told me before about a match you played away to Queens, I think it was, and there you're in good company.
Yeah, it was unreal in a way. I mean, the memory can play tricks on you now, but from memory, there were 6 internationals in that team going up that day. I mean, with poor little me. I mean, Paddy Madigan was injured, and I suppose the nicest compliment I got at the time was the fact that they left Spud in the back row and put me in hooker. So it didn't last long now. That was an experiment that they probably thought failed. But anyway, but the idea, Nick Popper was there, Spud himself, Johnny Murphy, Tony Doyle, Tony Ward. They were all there. It was an incredible group. We still managed to lose, by the way. It was all my fault. But some of the rest of the guys were Leinster players. So it was a really talented group of people. Yeah, it was great to get a run or two with them, because that was something that I would never have thought I was going to do.
Absolutely.
But,
so were you playing week in, week out with these guys, or were you playing seconds, or what was the
seconds?
situation?
Yeah, playing seconds mainly. fellow called Derek Donnelly. Do you know him? The Heineken rep in the area. He's up and down the club now, but he was captain at the time. Fellow called Jim Dean. He was captain the second year, I think. But the second was a very organised crew, you know, and they were sort of a very tight knit bunch in their own way. And even at that stage now, Jeremy, the two teams used to tug out in separate dressing rooms, you know. So we're sort of, you know, you had your own little club within the club, if you like, and it was nice and competitive now on the training pitch and things like that. And yeah, we had a good team. Scored lots of tries and didn't win anything, but it was good rugby, you know.
So you were overlooked for selection for the seniors. I can actually sympathise with that feeling, Kev.
I wasn't even.
Just
I wasn't,
don't know
I wasn't
talent when they see it, Kevin.
See, when you're trying to explain to other people, you say I was that soldier, but they had good hookers, whatever. One little thing I do remember is my first ever game at Greystones. I remember recoiling in horror because it was in Blackrock on the first Sunday in September, and the game was kicking off at 3:00 or whatever. And I just couldn't believe, and this will tell you the difference between where I was at and where maybe Greystones rugby was at. I couldn't believe they'd play rugby on the same day as the All-Ireland hurling final at the same time.
Oh, well.
I was from Offaly and Tipperary and places like I was just dumbfounded. It wouldn't even be thought about happening elsewhere. But these lads didn't even know the match was on, you know. So
yeah. Well,
I am in a different position, yeah.
So tell me then, did you finish up after those two or three seasons with Greystones, and did you play elsewhere, or did you just stop playing? Like, what was the?
No, I played in Railway Union for a good few years in Sandymount.
Oh, yeah.
I had a few friends in there, and it was just. I mean, I wasn't going to make it onto the first team in Greystones. That was obvious anyway, and there was lots of little reasons why I moved. But I spent many happy years there. It's a fantastic club. It's a small little entrance to Railway Union. I don't know whether you've ever been to it, but they call it, it's like a glue pot in there. When you get in, it's nearly impossible to get back out. And, you know, some very, very good players. Then there was a big connection with Bective at the time, and a lot of guys coming and going between both clubs and whatever. So we actually were very competitive. In fact, ourselves and Barnhall competed for the Leinster League there for a couple of seasons. They got over the line and we didn't, but they were good days as well there, you know, and I coached there eventually. But the likes of the experience in Greystones was enormous to have. I feel like when I went back to Railway, you know, there's no doubt about that.
So was that your first transition into coaching with Railway Union? So I mean, what age were you then when you kind of started taking up the coaching role?
About 34 or 5, I'd say. At that stage. Pardon?
What was the interest? Why did you get into coaching? Like, what was the...
Like a lot of people do, Jeremy, by accident. The coach at the time was kind of one of these guys who wasn't the most organised in the world, and you already kind of adhere to my view on that. And sometimes he didn't even turn up. So the idea really was to kind of just help out a bit, and bit by bit I sort of was being pushed into it, and then eventually the following year I ended up doing it, you know. So it just happened by accident. There was a guy called Jim Lowry who coached in Greystones a few years ago, was it? Yeah. He was actually a great encouragement to me at the time, and he was very involved in the development of coaches.
Carlo as well, I think, didn't he?
He was Carlo, yeah. It was very ironic because eventually we beat Jim's Carlo in a senior cup qualifier, but he always smiles at that. But he was a huge kind of I suppose support at the early days, and kind of encouraged me when it would be easy just to stop doing it. So I just kept at it. And I'd actually planned to finish when I got a phone call of Barry Keeley, and that's where.
Oh, really? Yeah, no way.
So, 7 years later, I was wondering what happened.
We'll get into that. You went back to your hometown in Tullamore. You were head coach there, and if I'm correct, you actually won the Towns Cup with them. Is that right? Yeah, but I'm not from Tullamore. I'm from a mixture. I always get in trouble with this, a mixture of Burr and Nina for different reasons. But I knew some people in Tullamore, and they approached me around this going down there. So yeah, we won the Towns Cup. It was just a fabulous thing. It's actually such a revered cup, and I suppose the whole town took to it. You know, it was fantastic. All right. The most ironic thing about it was I was working in Wicklow Town at the time. At Wicklow. I mean, it couldn't have been more awkward. It just couldn't have been more awkward. But because Wicklow, as a town, they had flags all over the place, and I'm thinking to myself, Jesus, this is a bit
hard to look at every day. But Tullamore took it fairly seriously as well. So yeah, we actually won well on the day. We had a good team at the time, and the celebrations there now would be legendary. They certainly, it wasn't a Saturday night and leave it. I think it was over an Easter weekend, and I think it went on for a few days. It was just
Brilliant. Did you stay at Tullamore for some time? Because I know Alan, your son, actually played with you there, or played for you. Isn't that right?
Yeah, Alan was a couple of days over age for the 20s. And he was kind of in no man's land, if you like. So he was 2 days over age for it. So yeah, he went up and down with me, which was great company, because there was a lot of driving, obviously, on my own otherwise. And he didn't get on. That wasn't the year that we won the cup now, but he got to play or be a sub in an Ireland junior club final, which was sort of a good thing for him. But there was a very, very good hooker down there as well, who had played a lot of senior rugby with Wanderers. So there was he was in good competition, but he really enjoyed it down there as well. But it was I had 2 spells there, Jeremy, and I interspersed with going back to Railway for a while. So that's why you probably know about the different years, you know. But yeah, great town, great people. I have to say, great time.
Were you involved when they gained senior status?
No, that was they went up by about a year or 2 years after I left.
Because I know you had a few playoff, round robins and things like that, trying to go up. Like it's tough to come out of junior leagues, isn't it?
See, at one stage, and like a lot of junior clubs were like this, at one stage they were very unsure whether they really wanted to become a senior club or not. I suppose that was the one thing that I tried to instill there, and maybe hopefully I helped a bit to get the message across that really, if you stand still, you're going nowhere, you know. And I think they're now a settled AIL team, and I think they're very happy to be that, you know.
Absolutely. So you eventually joined Bective. Was that Tullamore to Bective? Is that the chronology? Yeah. And it's funny, Bective and Greystones actually be quite closely linked in terms of personnel. Just looking at players here that were in and around your era at Bective that had played for Greystones previously: Robin O'Sullivan, Alex O'Sullivan, Connor Savage, Olin Savage was coaching, Ferdia Kenny, Sean Carroll, and then even Bubbles, and David Nutty, not to leave David Nutty out of any conversation.
Impossible.
Yeah. That wasn't by design, I assume. It was just a kind of Bective were doing quite well at the time. Greystones were kind of on a downward spiral, and a good few players moved up your direction.
Well, I mightn't have been the most popular person around this part of the world at that stage, I'd imagine, because there were some of them who probably were tossing up which club they'd go to, you know. So I think I'd been coaching some of them in Prez, and I think that was sort of a help as well, that they knew who I was, and they, I suppose, whether they liked it or not, they ended up there anyway. But some of them made huge. I mean, obviously Alex was a serious player at the time. He was just out of the Leinster setup, and Robin was just going into it, if you like. So it was, and as you say, the Savages were all involved, and Fergie Kenny, they like those guys all made huge impressions there, you know.
Mm-hmm. And when you were Bective coach, I remember telling me once you never lost against Greystones, and I can remember now Bective, beating Greystones fairly comfortably back in those days. What was your opinion of Greystones from the outside looking in? I'm a one club man. I've only ever played for Greystones. I only know what it's like within the bubble. But you've been outside of it. What does the average punter think of Greystones in that way?
Well, the first thing you were in a pub or I was in a pub, but we did lose to Greystones once, actually. I do recall that. I think it might have been one of Reggie's first games. He came in as an interim coach at one stage and then stayed, but one of his very early games, I remember we lost to them. I mean, Greystones would have been seen as a very exciting team to play. All the games always seemed to be very entertaining, and wouldn't have had the strongest pack at times, the biggest lads and whatever, but games were always very, very good. And we got over the line against Greystones a few times, but on the other side of it, those games could have gone either way at times. The Bective setup was, we had a huge pack. I actually remember Reggie coming down one night to do a scrummaging session when he was part of the Leinster setup, and he said to me, "This is a proper club pack." Like, they were huge men, and so we used that. We didn't have the pace that Greystones Greystones would have had, but we sort of had to try and suffocate Greystones a bit, and they obviously were trying to move us around. So it was a nice little clash of styles, and so that was obviously very interesting for me coming in and to see whether we could kind of get that balance a bit better, which is not the easiest thing to do.
When I was preparing for this, I was asking a few of the guys that I'd be in contact with from the team, what kind of topics would you be interested in hearing about? And everybody asked me about your relationship with Warren. Now, the Fords absolutely love Warren. He, like, John Campbell could talk to you for 3 hours just about how great Warren is. I often think if you're Walter White, Warren is Jesse Pinkman, streetwise and knows the ropes. But like, where did you first meet Warren? Was it in Bective itself?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how different things happen. We played a friendly, I think, against Suttonians, where Warren was coaching at one stage, and for some reason we just clicked, and we spent a good while after the game just chatting about things and whatever else. And it was then just when there was a bit of a shake-up I had stopped coaching in Bective for one season, went in as director of rugby. The director had gone, at that time, a fellow called Ben Keeley was gone in as president. So he asked me what I do. That was fine. I'd done that for that until Christmas. But then the coaching setup changed. I had to go back in coaching. And Warren was the first. I made the first phone call to him at that stage and said, "Look, would you be interested in coming in?" He'd been in Belvo, like, he's really well renowned. He's a great personality, as you know, and it was just a perfect match at the time for what Bective was, and then when it all ended for myself in Bective, he was extraordinarily loyal about that, I always remember that, and so we kept kind of in touch. And then when the Greystones thing happened, it was the first phone call again that I would made, because you're right. I mean, he has a unique personality and a great way of pulling people together, and he's always thinking about how a team works together, as in the personalities and the. He might sometimes pretend to be a bit laid back about it, but he's anything but. And he does get the best out of packs as well. He really does. From my end, it's great to have the likes of Warren there. Yeah, and like all those guys, Olin came as well. He was effective too.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And,
yeah. We'd seen what he was doing in press. It was very, very impressive. And the same thing, and all those guys were very good to me at the time as well. So it was great to be able to ask them, and they all said yes, which was fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Warren once, in not so quite a polite way, told me to go home from a training session once. But the way he phrased it, he didn't just say go home. He told me to F off back to my ma. Which I thought was a bit too descriptive.
Yeah, well,
but,
see,
he's a great way about him, and like your friendship, I think, with him really adds to the team, and the guys know that you're a package deal and you've got each other's back and things like that, and indeed with Olin as well. So it's great, and it is funny how many players went from Greystones to Bective, but how many coaches went from Bective to Greystones when you buried in there as well for a while.
That's right.
One of the things that I remember was, I think, your first day down in Greystones. You were just getting a tour around the club, and you met. I was the first player that you met. I was in the gym, and thankfully you didn't turn around and run away, thinking, "What kind of weirdos is this?"
Oh, you look very good in the gym.
Yeah, not elsewhere, unfortunately. But when you joined Greystones and you became head coach, had you an idea in your head of like what areas you could improve or work on or accentuate based off your dealings with them as Bective coach?
Yeah, I suppose in terms of just purely, as I said earlier on, purely organising the team, you're trying to bulk up the pack a bit and hoping that you can recruit. I mean, and that's very difficult. As you know, people don't easily move, and at that stage there was money being thrown around the place a bit as well, so it was very hard to encourage guys to come out to the Greystones. I mean, the traffic is appalling, as you know, coming out, so it's a real downer, trying to get fellas to do that. But yeah, I did. I mean, one of the things it was obvious was that just a quick look back over the previous few years, slow starting for the season and throwing away points that would have been vital at the end of the year. So being able to kind of, I suppose, identify that, explain to people what the value of pre-season training was. It was obvious that not everybody was committed to pre-season training, so I thought that was the thing that we had to sort of tackle first. So once people kind of bought into that, I think we really got a great start then.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny there, you touched on it, the slow start. I was playing J1s then, you'd come in, and I could not believe your attention to detail. It was, I've said it, used the word frightening. It was just like, my brother tells a great story. He says that one of your first sessions, you brought everyone up to the bar and you pulled out your famed PowerPoint presentation in your projector, and you went back through the previous 7 seasons and you're able to show the guys, tangibly show them that they lost the opening round of the AIL for 7 years in a row. And you put down a marker there and then you said, this year we're going to win the first match of the AIL. And I think that was something that I don't think anyone had seen before at club rugby, in Greystones anyway. Had some great coaches, but the attention to detail that you had was something that I think really anchored down the team. Another time I remember was I was in Cam's room getting treatment as usual, and you came in to do the round, see who's skiving off training, and I was just talking to you about a team. I think it was Armagh, and I said, "Oh, geez, they've a back row who played for Ulster, Falloon," and you said, "Oh yeah, they have him." They also have, and you went through from 1 to 15, every single player that played for Armagh, who they used to play for, what school they went to. You knew everything. It was like listening to Jose Mourinho. So I'm just curious, that attention to detail, is that something that you consciously work on? Is it just who you are? You like that in your spare time at home as well? Or does that preparation go into rugby uniquely?
Yeah, it's pretty. I believe in detail, because if you get detail right, you can usually build off that. But you've got to be very careful too, because not everybody wants to be hammered with detail. So if I was mouthing off to you in the physio room about whatever, I mean, I can fairly safely say that I wasn't going to go back to the team and go through all that with them in that kind of detail, because people just can't take that all in or don't want to take it all in. But I think I go back now to the start of the Bective time. I mean, really. I was dealing with a couple of players there, well, more than a couple, who would have had very serious pro time behind them, and a lot of it was about, like, they wanted a lot of information. They really wanted to know what about the opposition, what about our game plan. So I used to prepare something for them every after training on a Thursday night, and give them a takeaway from the week's training, if you like, and what we were going to do, but also a little bit of extra info that some of the lads would really want to delve into. I have never really done that in Greystones, and maybe it's something maybe we're getting closer to now, as the age profile slightly changes with the group. But yeah, the detail can be overwhelming for some people, but it can be really what other people crave, So you're trying sometimes to balance that, and it's an area that we have to think a little bit more about now as well, because some people say, well, just worry about your own game, but actually there's an awful lot of things to worry about the opposition too. They have the ball half the time,
Yeah.
So you do need to, and the more mature a player is, the more they start thinking like that, and how do we quell their strengths and use. So I think without a bit of detail there, you can't do that. But from our end, we try to manage that so that it's not overwhelming, and that people can take 2 or 3 or 4 things in. But after that, and I've had to learn that to my cost, Jeremy, that you try and stuff too much information on people. They don't even know what you said at the beginning. So
how many times would you watch a match back? What's your record?
Usually the ones you lose, you watch back more, actually. But you'd watch. You'd probably watch the full of the match maybe twice, but then you'd start looking down at the bits and pieces of it that really are important. The way we get the clippings done now, so we can, they become the point. And even this season now, we want to fine tune that a bit to try and put more general play, key areas of, say, defence or attack or whatever into that, so that the players start being able to see what we're looking at. And there's no point in me looking at it if the players don't. And the bit like what we said earlier on about detail, you can't give too much detail. So players are not going to watch a full match a second time. I mean, I know that of old, they're just not going to do that. But they will watch very focused pieces. where they can see, particularly for themselves, that they can learn more about their game or improve bits of their game. So that's the challenge now, to start doing a bit of that. And thanks to Barry Keeley and people like that, who were able to kind of allow us to get the people in to do that, and we Peter McPartin, who obviously does the video for us so every week. So we're able to use the kind of information we get out of the videos we get off them, and then distill them down with another guy in Sheridan helps us with the clips. So it's all part of detail, but managing detail, I think, is a big thing, and too much detail just overpowers.
There's a player, I won't name him now because he'll get in trouble, but he was in another part of the country working, and he decided to play for another AIL team. And he said he couldn't believe, having experienced your training sessions, he couldn't believe how disorganized this other team's training sessions were. He said the coaches would say, "Oh, lads, go off on a lap there," and they'd try and think up a new drill to do. And I remember I told you this after I learned of it, and I jokingly said to you, "Oh, sure, Kev, you probably know what you're doing with your training session 6 weeks in advance." And you said, without joking back to me, "Yeah, I do." How much planning goes into your training sessions? Because they are famously long, but I mean, if we finish it at 8:57 at training, there's another 3 minutes of a drill that you have planned in there. I mean, it's not a coincidence that things are broken down so minutely, is it?
Well, the training sessions are an hour and a half, and sometimes people looking up at the clock seem to get the right side worked or whatever. I always talk. There's a guy called Phil Warahiko. He was in Belmont and Clontarf, and he used to keep them out every 3 hours. So the lads from maybe want to be careful how to see it. It's a coach always wants to push more into it. Because you're always anxious to get the most out of it, and sometimes less is more. As well. So we're trying to figure out how to balance all that. But when you have a club team and you really have them for an hour and a half twice a week max, and you might be missing a couple of players on both nights for different reasons, the amount of time and the amount of energy and the amount of worthwhile effort put into something is really important. So we do break them down. I mean, people like Olin Savage now is notoriously focused on this kind of thing as well, looking at the breakdown of how many minutes here and how many minutes there, and that's all crucial that we get the most out of that time. Because when you add it all up, if you get an hour's coaching time done on a Tuesday and a Thursday, both nights, that's probably as much as you get 2 hours in a week. And if you're not organised for that 2 hours between warm-ups and cooling downs and all the rest of it, then how are you going to prepare a team for an AIL? Which is, like, when you look at some of the AIL matches, the teams we play against and the players we play against, some of them are like academy players, they're full-time pros effectively. So we've got to maximise that. So it is all part of that, I suppose, drive to try to succeed, but to try and distill them down into bits, so that you're moving quickly from one to the other. And players get bored, and players sort this thing out very early on. They see if things are disorganised, and they don't like it by and large. That's my experience anyway.
Absolutely. My least favourite phrase to hear from you was, "Right, lads, over to Olin." Like, oh God, here we go. But
it's great for me though, because it takes a bit of it, so somebody else is now under pressure.
But something that I kind of realised now is, like, you've had that similar enough group of players since they were early 20s. They're now, as you said earlier, approaching late 20s, some of them in their 30s. Over the course of those 7 seasons, they've become, I don't know if you realise it, they are so loyal to you. You are effectively a father figure to a lot of them. I think it's because of the culture that you might have created there. Like, was that something that you consciously do to try and create like a team culture, or does it just happen? Or, I mean, like, how have you gotten those guys so on side? I mean, I talked to some of the lads, Freddie O'Kenny, who's been 10 years with you. I remember him saying, like, wait till you see Kev on match day. You've never seen anything like it. This is a game when you coached me at J1s. How does that come about, that harnessing that in amongst the players?
Well, I wouldn't be as conscious of that now as you point out, but I suppose and it's good to hear, like, the people, but the lads are very good. They're very respectful of all the coaches, to be fair, and look, it's a tricky, I suppose, dynamic, isn't it? Because some players getting left out of a team, or some players being moved positions, or some things not working out for people, and sometimes there's not great news to be passing on. So it is a balance. But I think you touched on the big words there, culture. I think if you create a culture where, first of all, people are coming down in their spare time, for their hobby, for you could just say 7:30 to 9 o'clock or whatever, a few minutes after that you seem to be touching on there. But the point is that they've got to enjoy coming down there. They've got to be respected. They're coming down. Most of them are very serious about their game. Most of them do a lot of other work for their game outside of the time we see them in the gym or whatever it might be, and lots of people doing extra things and innovative things themselves. And then obviously the game on a Saturday, and there's huge, like they have to sacrifice a lot, because Friday nights are not a night that they can do much more often than not. If they do, we can smell that out early on, but that doesn't happen by and large. And the culture is about mutual respect. So if I suppose if players feel that the coaching staff are respecting them, and we have like Paul Lennon, who's a genius at managing people in different ways, and the other managers there are all so on top of that game, that it does mean that the respect becomes mutual. If that was ever challenged, and once or twice over the time, I mean, there was a couple of things that happened. One or two people might just, out of frustration, get out of line or whatever else. And you really have to tackle that at the time, because people watch that, and what would be dreadful is if that very good culture that is there would break up. And ultimately that would be the culture that will allow us, our first, seconds and 20s as a group, if you like, to actually work really, really well together, where there is respect across all the groups. That nobody, because they're on one team or the other, feels either higher than themselves or lesser than themselves. And obviously, we don't have as much contact with the thirds, but in the same way, that them and the women's teams also seem to have a very similar type of culture. So all we're doing is building on what was in the club anyway, and trying to ensure that respect is there. So that's a very long-winded way of telling you. You can edit all that out, Jeremy, but that's
no, not at all. It's very interesting, and it really is there. When we were prepping for this off air during the week, there was things I asked you. Is there anything you want to talk about in particular? And one of the things you brought up was your focus on creating, and you just said it there, creating that kind of blended environment between first, seconds, and under 20s. For a good few years, I was the captain of the seconds, and I probably went about things the wrong way. My thought process at the time was, we'll be our own team and we'll have our own separate identity, and to hell with the firsts. And it's absolutely not the way to go. You were talk about that man management. You met me one summer in the dressing room, in middle of July, and we had a conversation about what we can do for the seconds to make them improve the sentiment amongst the team, or amongst me maybe. But it is something that you do focus on. Like it's very important to you, and you have Barry Traynor there now, who's the seconds captain, and I can't think of anybody better than that. He's so he's in between both teams so frequently, and he's so well liked. But talk to me a little bit about that, creating that squad.
Well, it's back to the respecting, isn't it? Again, I mean, first of all, most clubs that have a good first team have a very good second team. Yeah. And we have been hampered over the last number of years a bit on this one, because we haven't been able to get the cream of the 20s coming to Greystones. I mean, this make-believe idea that if you're not playing with Lansdowne, UCD, or Trinity, you can't play for Providence or something like that, that myth has actually spread, and even though it's not true, a lot of people believe in it. So it has been difficult, because you'll always have slippage of players at seconds level moving out and not playing the following year. So in order to build up a squad, you need to have that. We're very close to that now. We're getting to that point. I mean, now you can see with a very good 20 setup, with Bubbles and his crew there, Billy working away, and Mick Cleary, like they've pulled together a very good group of 30, and this year I can see a number of these lads flowing into the first stroke second setup. And I'd like to think that, except for match day, by and large, that the three teams would do pretty much all the same kind of moves and plays and whatever else, and that there would be no huge culture shock for somebody jumping from one team to another, or going up or going down, and that if the training sessions are intermingled with players who are, first, seconds, and 20s, well, then they all get an opportunity to get comfortable in that environment and working with people who they wouldn't normally be. So when they come into a situation that they're able to function, and they have the confidence to function, because I don't think we should ever underestimate how difficult it is for somebody coming into a team where they don't know all the people in it. There's a natural kind of inhibition for some people anyway to react, and then there's other people who try to be too individualistic around it to make up for that. And what you're trying to do is say, look, you're in a comfortable position here. You're doing this on a Tuesday and Thursday. Just seamlessly slip in there now on a Saturday. Even though it might be only twice a year you come into that team, the players around you then are comfortable with you. They're not worried about you, because there is nothing like an unsettled dressing room where nobody's too sure what to do with this guy, what to do with him, who'll mind him type of thing. So we have to move away from that. So I think in a senior club setup, I mean, yes, there are the junior sides, if you like, the thirds and hopefully the fourths and others that you do need to have first, seconds, and 20s on the same page. And even though it's not possible to have them all on the same pitch all the time, because that's just not practical, you can set an environment. So I talk to Bubbles a lot about how we do things. Liam and Mick, who look after the seconds coaching, they're working with us all the time. There's no obvious difference, in what we're doing. And I'd like to think that kind of culture will be what will bring us there. If we could get to the point where our seconds are back up in Metro 1 and competing in Metro 1, which I think we're not that million miles away from now, then that will greatly enhance also the benefits of the AIL side, because you'll then know that the players are playing at a level that they can easily walk into AIL. Sometimes that's not so easy to see at Metro 2, because you are slipping down to the third team of some clubs and things like that, and not always, but sometimes you're doing that, and therefore it's hard to know, is this guy really up to an AIL? It might look exceptional at one level, but so we need to get to that point. And the same with the 20s. We'd love to get back to Prem 1. It's not that many years ago since KV and Alex had them in the All-Ireland quarterfinals, so that can easily be reinstated again. So I'd like to think that that's something that will always be there now, and that'll be hard to break. I don't think we should ever try and split the first and seconds. I know we had an argument about it, but I get the idea that the seconds have to have their own sense of themselves as well, because if they're not, they have to feel that they're a team in their own right and they have something major they're playing for, besides playing to try and get onto the first team. But there should never be a split between the two. You should always, and I would encourage first team players to, when they're come back from injury, to always play in the seconds team, and that's the way of coming back up. As you know, even in the games this year, parents were on the bench for the first, were starting with the seconds, and so on and so forth. And that's the way we should try and keep that going, I think.
Absolutely. You kind of touched on it there, talking about recruitment of players and getting guys to come through at 20s level in particular. Just how much work goes into that with yourself and Barry Keeley. I remember you once saying that you had spent weeks scrolling through, like thinking of every single player that you could possibly get in the books. What's that process?
Well, first of all, I often wonder whether Barry Keeley has what he does with the other few hours he's left in his life, because he spends an awful lot of time on this. But there's a balance to be struck here all the time. I mean, between over recruiting and under recruiting, and getting that balance right. The last thing you want to do is change the dynamic of a team by bringing in too many people. But certainly within a club like ourselves, we will always need to recruit. Whether it's retain would be the first thing I would always think of. I mean, make sure that you know who you have for next season, and make sure that nobody slips out the door. And thankfully, very, very few have, and that's great credit to the lads themselves. They're very loyal to one another, and that sort of is a great starting point. But then clearly there are gaps and weaknesses. I mean, you can look at the team and look, and I won't say any positions now, but you can look at certain positions and say, we're a little bit shallow there. This is a danger kind of sign. Like Andy, your brother, you mentioned earlier. I mean, he goes off to South Africa. Like, he was a first team scrum half for ages. Other player gets a new job, and suddenly there's a very big change in a position, and you just can't let that kind of sit there. Then you've got to try and see what else you can do. And do you change players around, or do you try and go out and recruit a specialist and whatever else? And sometimes it might be that another young guy is coming in, and therefore you can move somebody who is not traditionally in that position to a position, and you're actually recruiting from somewhere that's different, where the gap has actually apparently happened. So there's that, there's always the thing that, our fit, for some reason or other, the turnips don't produce the same size men around Greystones and Bray as they do in other parts of the country. So sometimes we don't have the biggest, pack, and we're playing against bigger men, and simply that sometimes that can undermine you, so you just simply have to say, well, we need a player in a position that's going to make a difference physically, and whatever. And we've done that over the years and brought in one or two people who've been very, 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 very good, I can remember Rushy Lennon, for instance, coming from Bective at the time. He was just a perfect player for us, and he really fitted in like a glove there, And that is the kind of thing that sometimes has to happen to try and keep yourself competitive. And as you go up the ranks and the games become more competitive, if you're not on top of that recruitment game all the time, you can struggle. So, it'd be great if we can start developing from within, that the 20s becomes where it all happens from. Like, not just the 20s, but I mean, you see the kids, they right down to where they're at, and there's great coaching going on there in the club scene at underage level, and you'd love to see those players coming through, but at the moment they're not necessarily all there, and for all kinds of different reasons they want to go to other places and experience different things sometimes as well. So you've got to keep your eye on that recruitment one. So we would set out before the season ends, what we need and where we need them, and then there's other people, I won't name them now, but around the club who actually help us enormously in terms of recruitment and that, and look at jobs and look at other opportunities that people might get to try and see what, you're looking. You can't pay people, but are you looking to see how you can make Greystones fit like a glove for somebody, and we do that all the time. And we talked off air about one or two guys who fit into that one as well, Jeremy. And sometimes some you win and some you lose, and that's the way it is. But it's an important piece of the jigsaw, right?
Yeah, sure is. When I went out to some of the lads and asked them what questions I could ask Kevin Lewis, Warren was one of them, but overwhelmingly, people want to talk about the rooking net. My first experience with the rooking net was, so if anyone's unaware, this is maybe a 2 meter square contraption with a net about a meter high less, that you have to run under and then try and hit tackle bags at the other end. And my first experience, Bobby Clancy was holding the tackle bags at the other end. And I'd say I was literally giving him 70 kilos. And he bounced me back into the rooking net. And you blew your whistle and you said, stop this session right now. If that ever happens again, there's no point in any of us being here. I said, oh my God. What? I don't know where to even start with it. It's. I think the U.S. Army has had to withdraw it from its the torture devices. And I understand you actually you own this. It's your personal property. Is that right? Is that myth true?
Well, it's followed me around. I'll put it to you like that. For whatever version of that you have, I don't know, but yeah, it's.
Have you a defence for the rookie net?
What's that?
Have you a defence for it, or is it just sadistic?
No, I have a huge defence for it, Jeremy. Actually, I don't know. You were one of the very few players who don't like it for some reason. Most of the lads ask me all the time, where is it?
You can't not pick anymore, Kev.
No, look, I mean, I've seen all kinds of people and efforts at trying to manage rucking over the years. I mean, the one guy down in Tullamore, he used to. A famous guy called Tim Bregan, he used to get the guys running under sort of like a hurdle, and if they put their head up high enough, he'd bang it down with a stick. So there's all kinds of ways of this kind of working. But the reality was actually that we weren't particularly good at rucking, and our body heights at tackle time was also not great. This was no innovation of mine now, by the way. This was being done at in fact, Ireland used to use a rucking net, so it certainly wasn't me bringing it out for the first time. But it certainly, I think it worked. But it also worked in the sense that at the end it was obvious that people actually knew that if they got this right early on, that the torture, as you call it, would be over quickly, and you know something, our body positions hitting breakdowns and what definitely improved a fair bit. We would be known as a decent rucking team around the circuit, and so that's my defence for it,
That's it.
Jeremy. And
Yeah, you
I
literally.
always remember it was Jack Keating used to be asking the various, is the rucking net coming out tonight? And then he said, but don't tell him.
Yeah. I remember, yeah, you'd be coming into Dr. Hickey Park, and you'd sometimes see it, and you go, "Oh God, will I just go home?" But yeah, as you said, though, I mean, I don't know if you saw the article recently attributing Will Connor's success to a rucking net that was used in Clongowes. So still churning out top players.
Yeah, it has its uses. We haven't seen it for a while yet. Now you've just brought it back into my memory.
Sorry, everyone. So, like, you'd established yourself at Greystones for a couple of seasons. You had a young squad. You brought them through as they got older and imparted your wisdom on them. You reached the absolute pinnacle 2016 when you won the AIL. Tell me a bit about that season. What was so special about that team?
Well, I suppose it was a pinnacle in terms of what we could have achieved. I wouldn't think it's the pinnacle of where the club is going to go to or anything like it. But the that was a very good team that had been building for a couple of seasons. You know, that was no overnight sensation. You know, so some very, very good players. That was the year that also you talk about recruitment. Mike Lee came over from Auckland, and he was a fantastic hooker. You know, and you know you had a hooker who was nearly as fast as a winger. You know, and you know, and still as strong as anybody else around the place. But it was no overnight sensation. It was a building thing. We had lost a playoff the year before. We were hurting from that. We knew we were good enough then. You have to build up confidence. There wasn't enough belief in the team probably. Maybe there wasn't even enough belief from the coaches that we could really move it on. But it's absolutely imperative within a club like Greystones that you keep moving in the right direction and keep moving away. It's so easy to fall back into junior ranks as well. Don't forget that. I mean, lots of clubs like De La Salle and Monkstown and people like those have all had a taste of that, and some like it and some don't like it at all. Effective now, So the idea really was that we kind of knew from the previous year, having lost in the playoffs, that we could actually get there if we really put our minds to it. And that group were just ready at the time. They were a good group, and they were very dedicated. And we played some fantastic rugby that year. I mean, I think we scored somewhere around 660 points that year, and I think it was only I think it was the second highest ever in the AIL times. So it was like and our defence was very good too. So we had I suppose it wasn't the case we set out at the pre-season and said we were going to get promoted, because I learned the hard way that players don't like to look at long goals like that. You need to, it's match by match kind of a process really. And we knew from some of the early season matches, I mean, we were scoring tries for sport and some fantastic players doing really exciting things on the pitch. So we knew we could do it. And then it was a question of, could we learn as the season went on, when the games got tighter, as to whether we could adjust our game? Because sometimes, we might have been seen as one-trick ponies a little bit by some. And if our major trick of moving the ball wide didn't work, well, what do we do next, type of thing, So I think we learned a lot on the hoof that year as well, if you like, as to how to manage games. So that when it came to the really crucial game, which was against Armagh shortly after Christmas that year, we were in a position to actually take the chances that were presented to us and to win the game,
Was that Armagh game, when you beat them away, was that when you started to think, it's on now, we could win this? Or I mean, you're so good at keeping your feet on the ground. Did you literally just take it match by match right until the Old Crescent game?
Yeah, we would never have discussed anything further in the next game ever.
Really? You never said, we could win?
No. And as I said, over the years you learn, at one stage in my life I would have been pushing that this is the target, lads, we've got to do this, and say that in pre-season, but actually that can weigh on people as well, and different people take it different ways. So look, the players knew after the Armagh game, they're all intelligent people. They knew Armagh had just lost the week before to Wanderers, which was a huge shock, because we had lost to them in Greystones, and we conceded a very bizarre try that day. And anyway, they beat us that day, on a day when maybe we should have won. But anyway, they beat us on our home patch, and that was hard. So it was hard to see where where we could make it up on them. But the two teams were trotting away from everybody else. There was no other teams really in contention, and so it was getting a bit frustrating. But we knew that we had one chance, and we had to beat them up there. So not alone did Wanderers had stopped them in their strike the week before, but then we said, well, no, they're after losing a game, so this is a great time to take them on now, because they're probably confidence might be a little bit brittle after that. And lo and behold, we went up there and we played out of our skins on the day, and they're a bloody good team, and I've shown that since. They've gone right on to All Ireland finals and top of 1B and whatever. So we, in my heart of hearts, I knew we were good enough, and we just couldn't afford to take our finger off the pulse at any time. But if we kept doing that, they couldn't catch us, and that was, the numbers game was such that we had, forget what it was, 2 or 3 points up on them at the time. We just had to keep getting bonus points week in, week out.
Yeah, I don't know if you know. I think that from that Armagh game onwards, I think there was 50 points available, and Greystones got 49. I mean, just an incredible season.
Yeah.
When the full-time whistle went then in Old Crescent, or maybe at half-time against Old Crescent, which was the last game of the season, what was going through your head? What was the feelings like? I mean, you'd been on such a long journey. I mean, your journey with Warren and Olin and Barry Lynn would have started 10 seasons earlier, and your journey with Greystone started 30 seasons earlier. What was the feeling like when you realised I'm an AIL winning coach?
Well, I never actually thought of it like that, but I like it was fantastic, like to win, the excitement in the place that day. I think the week before that we'd won in Wanderers in a game where it was kind of a harem scaring kind of game, and but we got the bonus point early enough, and actually then thought we had won that day, I think, and suddenly they came back and we had to really roll our sleeves up. But so every day was a bit of a challenge. So it was really, the Crescent situation, we were very lucky, because the Crescent situation was that they were in the playoff contention. They were going to be in the playoffs, but they had nothing to gain. They couldn't change their position. So we knew that if we could start well against them, but of course the opposite happened actually. Well, no, we got a good try early on, but then they came back into it. And so it was sometime maybe with about 15 minutes to go, it became obvious we were probably about 25 points up at that stage. And look, we'd hardly blow it now, but when the final whistle went, there would have been a bit of elation around the place. I mean, it's a long journey, and you rarely win competitions. I mean, you can go through your whole life. I used to say this to the lads, that a lot of that great Greystones team we talked about earlier on probably never won an AIL or never won a Leinster Senior Cup medal or whatever. Like, our lads were winning. They'd won 3 at the state, won 3 of those Leinster Division 2 cups. So there were pennants and medals coming into them and whatever else. They were getting used to it, nearly a bit complacent about it. But to win any AIL section is very difficult. We won 16 out of 18 games that season, and my God, every game was a battle, in one way or another. So there is a great sense of elation and satisfaction, and that was a great night in Greystones Rugby Club as well. And I think the following day wasn't too bad either. So there was and it was great to see all the people who had been there over all the years back. There was a huge crowd in the club that day, and those are kind of days that you crave in rugby because they don't come around too often. So it was great. It was a great reward for people like Bobby Clancy and those who have been there for so long, and given so much, and for all the other coaches before me who had, like Reggie, for instance, who was immediately before me and had encouraged me to come into this particular role. They had all played their part in the build up to that, So it was a fantastic feeling when we got over the line.
Absolutely. One thing that sticks out to me that week leading up to the Old Crescent game. Your structure of training was similar. The fitness, Olin did 2 sessions on a Tuesday of the mass running. Then on a Thursday, he'd just do 1. And I thought, it was like fairly intense fitness, even on a Thursday. There's a match in 48 hours. And I remember thinking, there's no way they're going to do fitness training on Thursday before the last AIL. There's just no way. Sure enough, the 3 words, over with Olin, came out. And, It was the same, like you said. It was match by match. Every game is the same. No match is different to the other. It's just focus on the goal in front of you, and so impressive and such a great achievement. Moving on then, that's kind of for you. I suspect that was kind of the pinnacle of your coaching career. But funnily enough, your playing days weren't actually over. Because I don't know, was it that season or maybe the season afterwards? You played a Casey Cup game. And my memory from you in that match was first of all, you ran onto the pitch and you pulled your front teeth out. What was that?
I'd forgotten to put them away.
I said, "Oh my God, Kev means business." And then there was because there were some good players. You were in the front row, I think, with Mark Phelan and Nick Popwell. And
at one stage, I was in the front row with Nick and Spud, and my claim to fame was that there was 49 caps in that front row. Now, I didn't have to go into the detail of how to make that up. Well, yeah, that's right.
Brilliant.
And Victor, of course, having given a great pre-match speech about how we were going to really get stuck into these lads and all the rest of it. And the kickoff came in, and whatever happened, he went down with a grunt and a groan had to be carried off. So,
how did you find playing your match back after all the skills you'd learned as a coach? Did you find that you applied any of them to the game?
Pure survival, Jeremy. Memory. Don't have any big lads hit me.
I remember watching it, and someone on the wing made a break, and every single player ran towards the touchline, where the winger was making the break, except you. You ran north to where you anticipated the ruck would be. I thought, that is genius. So when I was playing matches then, I started doing it myself. I was like, geez, you learn things from the old dogs.
That was just the shortest possible line, Jeremy. Sure.
Coming towards the end of the episode now, just gonna want to go back and ask the questions that I ask everybody at the end of each session, and you can answer this as from a player's perspective or as a coach. I'll let you decide, because I don't want you to start calling lads out. But who's the best trainer that you experienced at Greystones Rugby Club?
The best trainer. Well, I suppose, look, in fairness, they all train very well by and large. They are the senior players are not that by accident. But I suppose there are two guys who, for pure consistency over my time there, and both who would have been in the 20s, actually, come out of the 20s, and both who would have probably come out of Pres, probably under Owen's guidance. Maybe that's something got to do with it too. But I mean, like Conor Pearce and Cormac O'Donoghue, who coach, they train really well all the time. Like they would have had for the last 6 or 7 seasons, consistently, week in, week out. They don't miss very many matches. They're always in good shape for a match, and they make everything from themselves. So certainly, Piercy just trains like an animal all the time, which is great to see, and a great example for other guys. So they, without having thought of it too much, they would be two that would stand out to me.
What's your favourite Greystones memory?
I'd have to say that day against Crescent. That would be hard to beat. I think just the whole feeling. In fact, the hour in the changing room after the match against Crescent, that with the team and the coaches and managers and whatever, that was great crack. And just it's kind of one of those places that weren't that many in the place, but it was just a great feeling among everybody that was there. Just people happy with the job done.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a great day for the club. What's the toughest match you've been involved in? The 2 games would jump out at me, Jeremy. So one is that when we lost to Rainey in the playoff. That was so sickening. We had come from a bit of we let them get an early lead, and we came back, and it was as hard as nails. The game, it was a really tough game, and they were a good team too, as they've proved since. And we just fell short at the line, and really we deserved to win it, and that was a killer. But the toughest game, physically, I'd say, that we played in all the time was we played Highfield down in Highfield, and actually the weather was so bad at that time that Woodview Park was actually unplayable. So they brought us out to grounds they have out in Mahon, which are really kind of public grounds.
And like to say we thought we had gone to the swimming baths would be an understatement. It was just, and Highfield had a huge team, a really big, bulky team, which didn't suit us at all. And they battered us for the first 40. I mean, in fact, we weren't sure the game should have gone ahead, but anyway, it did. In fact, I always remember we came down in the air coach. The Leinster bus was written on the side of it, and I think we annoyed them when we drove in with that in the first place. So, but they battered us for maybe 50 minutes, and then something just changed, and we started getting into it. Now, as I said, underfoot conditions were appalling, but it was great that we had taken so much for battering, and we're actually still in the game. And with the last play of the game, a bit of a funny story on this actually. The last play of the game, we got a line out on the halfway line, and we had a call for a ball. We had a fellow called Blake Hill, who was over from New Zealand at the time. He was a good thrower, and we had this call where he threw the ball over the back of the line out onto the winger. And I remember when Bobby Clancy used to quote it when the call went out. I won't say the quote or the call now, but your man said, "Oh, you might as well call it Hail Mary ball." The prop beside him said to him. But anyway, the ball was perfectly thrown over the back. I think Paddy Gagan caught it on the run, and it ended up with Owen Marmion scoring a try in the far corner, which put us 1 point behind, and a conversion to come. And like, I don't think you could see Owen Marmion after. He was covered in mud and splatter or whatever. And Killian then his brother had to line up the conversion, and he couldn't. There was nowhere you could actually put your feet to run up to take the kick. And he put it over to win. And I think, first of all, I don't think anybody could believe it. And secondly, it was probably one of the best kicks I've ever seen in my life. And it was a combination of probably what was one of the toughest games I've ever seen or been involved coaching with anyway, and one of those games, actually back to what we said earlier on, one of those games that ultimately gave us the confidence that maybe we could get up to the next level,
On the Club Scene podcast, you had said that the best player you coached was Bobby Clancy for Greystones. What I'm curious is, who's the best player you played with at Greystones?
Well, I didn't play with him very often, but the best player was definitely Spud Murphy.
What was it about Spud? Because this is not the first time that answer has been given. What was it about Spud that was just so unique? I never saw him play. Tell me about him.
He was just unbelievable. I mean, he was just a bundle of energy. So hard, so tough. Like every minute of every game counted for him. It was just. I'd say he was every coach's dream, to be honest. He just was such a good player. He was as fast as a back. He was as tough as anybody out there. He was as physical and as fast in all in one go, if you know what I mean. And he had a great kind of ability to stand up when things were going wrong. He would be the one standing up and whatever. So I didn't play with him. I more saw him playing than play with him. But he was an incredible player. In fact, I think even with Ireland, I think they weren't too sure whether he was a wing forward or a hooker. And he kind of fell between both. But God, he was. Look, there was fantastic players there. That was the era when I mentioned the other internationals were there. So you had great players, but he was fantastic. And as I said, Bobby was a great player as well. There's no doubt about it. Never got probably the rewards he deserved at the next levels, but he certainly was as good as any.
Yeah, geez, well, that kind of concludes the interview. You've been so good giving me your time, and really do appreciate that. It's been fantastic listening to you, telling all your stories, and lots more ahead, I'm sure. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
And Jeremy, thank you, because I know you're doing this around a number of people in the club, and I suppose it's nice to think that people like yourselves just think outside the box. And I'm not too sure anybody's going to listen or to too much of this, but certainly the idea of doing it and keeping the club active even in this period is great. So well done to yourself.
Dude, thanks so much. No, it's the least I can do after annoyed so many players and coaches over the tenure of my career. So no, delighted to do it.
I don't think you annoy too many now.
Very thankful that you came on. Thank you so much. It's been fantastic talking to you, and we'll speak again soon.
Thanks, Jeremy.